So this is a lot to cover today. So I will do my best to give you all the goodies. We're going to focus today mainly on Lumen, but during the lab, for those that are curious, I can walk you through and talk to you about baking lighting. Because baking lighting is cool. You get less realism. It's pretty easy to set up, but there are a lot of things involved because Lumen is now the big boy out of the box, no longer bake lighting. So if you are familiar and haven't touched Unreal in a while, you may like Lumen. You may like it. And Lumen is pretty optimized where you can even run Lumen on a mobile device, believe it or not. It does really great. It does really great. Excuse me, can't talk today. I get choked up every time I talk about it. It gets really great performance output for what you're doing, and it downscales really nicely. So it does really well on that level. Now, the things you can run into, if you decide to use Lumen, but you don't like, say you had a higher poly count character and you're in a kind of a lower environment, like maybe the character is the main focus, maybe they're in darkness and they just have a torch and they're in like a dungeon. You could keep things simple if you were to output for these are just little nerd nuggets I'm throwing at you. If you wanted to keep things a little more performant, and say you were going to a mobile device kind of thing, scenario, you could put a simple circle shadow parented underneath like a socket in the character, and no one would be the wiser. No one would judge you harshly because that's very top down esque type of thing to do on a mobile device. But it allows you to do it allows you to keep that shadow if you wanted to. So let's talk about this here. I went a little bit of a tangent there, but I do love this Latin. So we're going to first look at lighting terminology. Let's look at the course outline here. Lighting terminology and types. We'll look at light properties and settings. We're going to look at an introduction to Lumen. I'll talk about how that works and some of the best things to do. Now, Lumen, I'm going to mention this several times, is still evolving. You still may get some noise in some of your highly reflective surfaces. It's not 110% there yet. Like, I don't know if you guys remember when Ray Trace first showed up. It was awesome, but there was still some noise in a few things. So you just have to keep in mind, and I'll point out some things to do to maybe reduce that. But that's still growing, being stronger, better. It is much better than it used to be. We'll look at nanite, looking and using nanite. And during the lab, I might throw in some optimization nuggets so we can talk about how to manage your scenes. We'll look at the lighting tools. This is one of my favorite tools ever. Environment Light Mixer. You saw Edward demonstrate it a few days ago. And a light mixer just helps you organize. So we'll briefly talk about that. And then finally, we'll look at the fog tools to get some more of an atmospheric look. This is going to be pushing things towards the end and may bleed a little bit into our lab, so just be aware. All right. Oh, I forgot to mention, we're going to interactively, and I think I have it set up here. We're going to light a few scenes. So be prepared for that. That's going to be fun. So lighting terminology and types. So what do we have here? So lighting definition types. We have direct lighting. We have indirect lighting, which can cause bounces, and we also have shadows. Now, the shadows we're going to be mainly using are virtual shadow maps. Now, if you weren't going to use virtual shadow maps and do the as mentioned previously, baking, you're going to be changing that to just plain shadow maps, but we're doing virtual shadow maps. And in here, this allows us to have an update on the fly without having to bake on static items. And the difference really is it bakes the texture in baking lighting. It bakes like a texture, almost like an alpha pass. And that you can think of it as like it just cutting out the shadow. It bakes it on the geometry and on the things that are static. If we have a static, say we had a static sphere and I bake the lighting, you would see that shadow bake on the ground. And when you move the sphere, you would see the shadow stay there, and then you have to rebake to get that shadow to come back. So that's the really big dynamic difference between, oops, let me go back. Really big dynamic difference between using bake lighting and using Lumen. Lumen gives you the ability to be able to update all your shadows and have a lot more believability to your scene and not have to worry about baking constantly. You actually can have your light update. That does a pretty darn good job. So Lumen is Unreal Engine's 5's fully dynamic global illumination and reflection system that is designed for next generation consoles. It's not like I'm like late night, right? It chops, it dices, it slices, it cooks everything. And even your dog will survive the microwave. Like all these things try to sell you. Yes, I am a salesman. And it is the default global illumination reflection system. And I gotta say the reflections are pretty great. The cool thing about the reflections when using Lumen is you will get GI, global illumination, in your reflections. So Lumen renders diffuse interflection with infinite bounces. Say interflection several times after waking up at 7 a.m. Bounces and indirect specular reflections in large detailed environments at scales ranging from millimeters to kilometers. Pretty great. So this is where the baked lighting, if you weren't quite sure, didn't quite resonate, didn't really understand what I said earlier. So here's a breakdown. It is pre-computed rendering lighting. You got to be sneaky with this one. Baked lighting is created using Unreal's Light Mass Radiosity Baker. So we're like basically baking, and when you bake, you could even, if you had a really long bake, you can actually even send it to the old school render farm kind of thing that we have that we use. Um, that's another topic, and we'll talk about that one later. So similar to rendering lighting with V-Ray, Corona, etc., is used to create high quality indirect lighting using light and shadow maps. Baked lighting cannot be altered at runtime, so that's a disadvantage, but has little impact on real-time performance. So it's low on impact, but the disadvantage is you have to rebake anytime you make some changes, specifically with your static meshes. So things have to be updated. Now, there is lighting that is updated each frame, real-time dynamic, and it is fully dynamic and can be moved around and modified at runtime. It has no global illumination component. This is relating more to the baking. I can have baking, and then I can have a dynamic light that moves around in there. So I can actually have a light that's movable, but you're not going to get any GI off that little sucker. So Unreal can use static and dynamic, and again, that's more towards baking. For architectural viz, they do that sometimes, not all the time. They do love Lumen, I must say. Lumen can be used by their, but there is currently some reflection limit. So, like I said before, you could get some noise in your materials. I should say instead of reflection limits, but noise situations. But and I'll walk you through how to fix some of that. So ray tracing also is an option. You can actually turn on ray tracing in your project settings. Now, ray tracing, you got to be careful. It's expensive. You can use it for real time. You've seen it on Cyberpunk, and it looks amazing. We even taught some of those people that work on those type of games. But the thing you have to keep in mind is when using it, it is pretty not as optimized performance wise as Lumen. You do get sometimes better, softer shadows with nice, nice. My words today. You see the shadows fade off from the point of contact, and but it is kind of expensive. So I would probably stick to Lumen if you guys can. It's easier to use, and it's faster, and you can always dumb things down accordingly and not have maybe as much lights or complicated shaders or yeah. Light types. So we're looking at directional light, point light, spotlight, rec light, my favorite. Oh, I love rec light. I use that way too much on Love, Death, and Robots because it's so awesome. It's really great. It's like a series of point lights in a rectangular shape. It's one of the most expensive lights you could use, but it is so great for fill light. It's fantastic. Skylight is great and allows you to give some nice overall bounce going on. HDR backdrops. Now, let me give you a little note on this one. You can turn these on and you can use them, and they're great, but a lot of times they're used for architectural, and a lot of times they're used for product showing off. They're not necessarily used for games. They're not necessarily used other than those areas, but you can have it like on the outside of your building. Say your game's always inside of a building. If you wanted, you could have HDR backdrop to give that fake facade of a background going on. Now, Alex, I don't know. Do you remember the name of that website that gives you free HDRI? Haven, HDRI Haven.
Yeah, I was
Never
just about to
mind.
say, you got it.
So if you guys
I'll post
did
the
want to
link.
play with this and you needed some really cool, because there's a lot there, you can go to a place called hdrhaven.com and they give you some really nice HDR to work with. And you can turn these on. I believe this guy's still active for plugin. Also via templates, if you are choosing architectural, this will be automatically on, I believe, and should pop on for you um, on there. We have Sun and Sky. Sun and Sky is also on, I believe, also with architectural templates. That just gives you a compass to set the day, the time, and you can turn these on at any time and hook them up if you need to. I'll point that out a little bit. I don't think you guys are going to be using it as much, um, but we're going to be setting up a simple environment and stuff to play with here. Cool. Additional resources. A link there. Light properties and settings. So let's do some playing with some things, and we're going to take a look at setting up Lumen in general. You can see some of the things we have to deal with Lumen when you say using even a spotlight. We have indirect light intensity, attenuation, use temperature, source radius, source angle, inverse square, fall off, and IES profiles. And I'm going to talk a bit about what those mean exactly because it seems weird. All right, so let's go to Unreal. So Unreal, I have several different lights in here, and say we're going to bring in one more light. I'm just going to grab a light and put it in. So again, to be able to get to your lights, you can use the Fancy Cube and go to lights here. You can also set up, there's a selection mode we can get into, but for now, we're just going to stick with the cube. It's up to you because what these modes do in our selection mode, you'll notice we're able to hit selection, which is Shift 1, and there's an interface you can also pull up too for that. And I, for some reason, can't remember because I don't use it as much as I used to. Where to get that guy, but it can come up if it's a little bit helpful. But you can always lean on the fancy cube here, which I do, and you can go in here and grab a light. So in this case, we're gonna pick on the point light first. Actually, let's look at directional light. He's already in here. Then we'll look at the point light. So we'll just go all the way down. Oh, I'm sorry, point light. I don't mean to shift you in order, but we must go in line according to who's showing up. Sorry, so I'm sure he forgives me. So let's go to the directional light. So this is the great thing about this directional light. If you're using a setup environment, you can actually, and what I mean by that is you have everything connected accordingly. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. You can actually change the time of day, and I'm just hitting the space bar to change between widgets and I can change my time of day and it's going to relate to my little atmosphere I have in here, which is cool. So I could change that and I can rotate this. Pretty great. And we can get like evening wear, swimwear. Look at that. It's pretty great. Look at that. That's pretty awesome. So I love that being able to have that in there. And my light, when you bring it in, by default, um, if you're getting an established scene, Unreal will make this guy movable. And when you bring him in initially and you're building your thing, it also will. Yeah, that's right. It will be movable when it comes in. The other light's not so much. So we have a directional light in here. So if I pull in another light, we'll go to point light. This point light is set to stationary. That is not supported in Lumen, so you're not going to get the full benefit of it. Now, it'll look like it's doing its job, but if you really want accurate bouncing and to be able to calculate things correctly, you want to set that to movable. Now, you won't see a shift in your lighting, so don't let that deceive you. It's easy to keep rolling and forget to turn on movable. But if you want this calculated dynamically, you want to turn that on for your lights. And that'll make it so Lumen and the light are playing nice and doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Cool. And the only reason that can fool you is because these lights are set not only just to support lumen, but also baking. So on the outset, they'll be set to stationary and static, which are supported by baking. And Unreal doesn't know your intentions, so you have to make it known. So switch that to movable if you're in lumen. You should be right as rain. Now, directional lights. These are fantastic. I'm going to talk a little bit about the settings. I'm going to show you how to build a lighting scenario super quick, and we'll get back to this scene. So we have intensity control. And again, I'm going to be careful not to do too much buttonology here because there's a lot to talk about, but I want you to know about the main things you'll be handling. We also have a light color, so you can change the color at any time. Source angle. Now, source angle, if I mess with this and I change this a bit, you're going to notice my shadows are going to start to get blurry, almost like overcast type of day where the light's bouncing around a lot. If I set it back to default, you see the shadows get sharper. So this is where you would do this in this particular area. Now there's a source soft angle. We'll talk about that with a point light a little bit, but basically softens the shape of the light. So if my sun is reflecting off this little pillar here, I can actually soften that output of how that looks. So source soft angle handles that. We can use temperature on or off. In this case, it's on by default, which works great. Excuse me, 1 second. I'm going to clear my throat.
Real quick, Sean, while you're clearing your throat, there's a request to do the same thing we did yesterday to make all the text bigger in that debug widget thing.
All right, okay, where is that debug widget thing again?
Yeah, it was under debug. Yeah, tools debug. And then widget reflector
Thank
down
you,
there.
sir. Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
I'm spoiled. I'm not used to using it. I'm fine. I don't care about you guys. So let me see. What was the number we came to? Was that one? How's this? Is that good, guys? Right there? 1.117. A little higher.
Watching the Slack. Yesterday was 1.2. Let's see if people wanted
Oh,
more than
let's
that.
do 1.2. That's fine. Cool. All right, let me close that. Well, thanks for pointing that out, guys. I don't want you to miss anything. I know I'm spoiled with my 4K resolution monitor and my tiny, tiny icons. All right, so what was I talking about? Oh, directional light. We're going through. No, that's not directional light. This is the guy. We're going through some of the things to consider. So we have affects world. You want to make sure that's on. Cast shadows. Now, if it doesn't affect the world, it's going to be very weird. It's almost like you're neutering your directional light because the directional light's kind of made to affect the world. And if you're familiar with your DCCs or other 3D packages, the directional light is that environment light. And it works really great and you can jump in really quickly. Now we're going to talk about, we have indirect lighting intensity. This can be controlled at any time. You notice I edited mine, but we also have volumetric scatter intensity, which we'll talk about later. This allows us to be able to control how much, if we have fog in the scene, is being influenced and influence how this light is influencing that type of fog environment. Like you'll see more fog scatter. Say I had a spotlight and I increase this, you'll see more fog scatter around the light's areas because wherever that hot spot of the light where it's coming from is going to imitate water particles bouncing around in a fog environment, and you'll see more fog coming from that area where the light is beaming and doing its job. Now there are some advanced settings here. Some of these will go over, some of these you will use in some particular cases. A lot of times I don't mess with these too much. I mess with them more when I was baking lighting to be able to get the exact look I want. But Lumen out of the box works pretty well. But you have the ability to edit these and customize these, which is really great with Unreal to be able to do so. One thing I do want to mention is lighting channels. It is the equivalent or close as Unreal can get right now to light linking. So, and what I mean by that is if I click on this particular object and I say channel, you'll see that he's on channel 0, and everything I click on, you'll see is on channel 0. But if I didn't want it on channel 0, I turn that off. You'll see the object disappear, or you'll see it so that it only takes the shadow on channel 1. So if I wanted a particular light to do so, I can do that. So you can do that on here. It may have baked in the past and the shadow's kicking around, but what happens is then that object will no longer take light from the environment when you switch the channel for it. You'll see that light, see the light go away. The shadow's still sticking around, but the light information is gone on that particular deal. Now, when I do that, I can switch it to be able to only take light information from another object. So say I introduce a point light, and this point light's in here. He's just at the ground. And I'm going to make it so he's only channel 1. So now you'll see that he is affecting this object. Nothing else is. Now, forgive my funky shadows. That's just a matter of it not refreshing like I wanted to. Typically, the shadow would go away, but for some reason, it didn't do that today. So it looks like it's still being affected, but not highlighted wise, just shadow wise. Oh, it looks like the highlights are taken on there. He's on a different channel. What the heck, dude? Oh, I might have to have a jury ticket on that one. So I got that. That kind of breaks my brain a little bit. So, but it's supposed to do this most of the time the way you're supposed to. But he's not supposed to. Ignore the directional light, dude. You're on a different channel. So, it's a little coming in rough, as you can see. The thing is about it is we're supposed to be elaborating on this so that the channels work better or more like light linking. But stay tuned for that because I've been asking that for a while to try to get them to do that. So they are busy. They have lots of stuff. And it's not a huge deterrent in the fact that you can actually have that so this guy doesn't even receive shadows at all. So that's not too hard of a fix. Let me turn this off. So now let's go ahead and take a look at building our environment lighting really quickly. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in the slides. We talked about how we were going to look at the environment light mixer. I'm going to show you a little bit ahead of time to show you how quickly you can set up your lighting. So we're jumping a little bit ahead here, and that's okay. We'll be all right. I think we'll live. Okay, let's go back to Unreal. And let's say we just have a new level. Brand new level, empty world. We'll do empty level, just super basic. Create that. We'll say don't save. So with this blank level that we just made, you could follow along with me. Excuse me. We're going to go to Windows, and we're going to go to our environment light mixer right there. I just sound so emotional today. I'm going to click on environment light mixer. Now the environment light mixer gives us three different options here. We have normal and normal advanced. That just gives you some more options for editing within those lights once we establish them. Notice nothing happens really other than empty slots when I do it this way. But once they populate, it will give us the options and when we can flip through these. So number one, excuse me, we'll create a sky light. Now you're going to get an error at first because it needs other dependencies such as volumetric cloud and also a sky atmosphere. So it's waiting for those. So you can create an atmospheric light, sky atmosphere, volumetric cloud, and height fog. Ooh, that's nice. During the lab, I'm going to show you guys how you can actually swap out your clouds. And you can easily do that by turning on your volumetrics in your plugins, and I'll show you how that later. If for some reason I forget, please remind me. And I'll show you can actually even stylize your clouds too. You can do that too. But look at that. We're all set up. We got the lighting. We got everything established. We can start doing a little bit of working. So the environment light mixer is your bestie. You'll notice also there is a light mixer. This just organizes things for your lighting. We just have this light in here, and it just allows you to get there without having necessarily scroll everywhere. I usually just put things in a folder, and I don't really use this guy too much. He was supposed to be, or at least his first introduction when we were experimenting with him, had a little bit more control, a little bit more things you could do. But you can see you can do some things here, only selected, only current content bundle. So there are a few things you can do, but usually I don't use this guy too much, but he is available if you want to play with it. All right, let's go back to our scene. Excuse me. I am sorry. It is, yes. Don't say it. All right. Let's get back to it. So in our scene here, we have several different lights. We looked at the directional light and all the different things you could do. Let's now pick on the point light. So you see I have a point light here. This guy's great, but you'll notice his shape is so weird. Let me show you how you actually can control the shapes of your light. So let me go and delete him real quick. Let's go and bring in a new point light. We're going to bring in that point light because we're using Lumen. We're going to turn on movable. Now, before we get too far into what we can do with the light, let me actually get you rolling because I can get excited on this when we keep going. But let's actually talk about establishing and getting Lumen set up. So one of the first things you'll need is a post-process volume. You can get that established in there. And we'll get back to him. Just put him in your scene. Don't have to increase his size. You can just leave him as is. And we're gonna have to go into our project settings. In our project settings, by default, Unreal should have your Lumen ready to go. But there are a few checkboxes that you could do, especially if your graphics card supports it, that can get you in the right spot. Under Engine, if I scroll down, we can go to Rendering. And under Rendering, if I scroll down here, we want to make sure that we're turning on a few things. Now, by default, Lumen should be active. And if we scroll down just a bit more, you'll see that we can choose lighting hit mode. I like to use hit lighting reflections if my computer supports it, but if for some reason it's too beefy, and we'll talk about these settings a little bit later, you can set that to surface catch. And that's a little bit dumbed down, and then you could use that one if you need to. There's detail tracing and global tracing. And you'll see when using software tracing, Lumen will trace against the global distance field and it gives you the fastest traces. So it's a lighter weight than detail tracing, which it costs a lot higher and gives you a little bit more accuracy. So those are really beneficial to consider and keep in mind. Now, your virtual shadow map should be on, but there's two particular ones I want to point out. There's one, support hardware ray tracing. And we want to turn on use hardware ray tracing when available. These are going to help us with our scenes, and especially with things that start to punch into each other, pieces of geometry. It'll allow you to calculate things and those bounces accurately and make it so your scene is a bit more believable. So keep those things in mind. That's really, really, really helpful. Another thing you want to do is you want to make it so, let me point out a few things, especially if you're messing with the modeling tools. I'm going to type in modeling for a second. Because you're using ray tracing to fall back on. So you want to enable ray tracing while editing. That can be helpful, especially if you're sculpting. Now, this is more of a problem when ray tracing was first introduced, but I like to turn this on anyway. In this case, I'm not really modeling, so I have to worry about it. But if I'm using some of those tools, that allows things to update so you get less of an issue that may occur. There used to be some crashes that would occur when you're using the modeling tools and you're leaning a bit on ray tracing or have ray tracing on. That sometimes was an issue. And new mesh objects, you can also turn on and enable ray tracing if you need. So those can be kind of supportive there. Also, SM6 should be on. And you'll see I have mine for Vulkan. I'm not pushing any Linux stuff, but I just turned it on for, I don't know, just to be fancy. I really just need this one. So you want to turn that on when you can, because then that helps with your virtual shadow maps. It makes it so your shadow maps, you also can use it, look at them through the viewer. I saw somebody posted about the viewer in the lecture notes, and I will point those out a bit more than likely in the lab to help you out a bit. Man, that air conditioning really rocked me today. I bet there. It's got me all clearing my throat and stuff. All right. So let's go ahead in here and look at a few more things. So now that we have Lumen set up in our scene, we know that we're using SM6. We know that virtual shadow maps are on. We want to have that post-process volume established, and we want to scroll down to that post-process volume. In this post-process volume, we want to make sure that we have a few things set on. So one of them is we want to make sure our Lumen scene quality by default works pretty well, but if you wanted it to push it a little bit more, you can. Keep in mind that the higher you go, and Unreal's so nice with the pro tips here, it gives you a better quality, but at a higher GPU cost. And the same thing with scene detail. And the scene detail can really help you, especially if you have like larger values with will ensure small objects are represented. So if you have a lot of little tiny bits, this can be kind of helpful to make sure that they are rendering correctly with their light. Now we have lumen scene view distance. This just allows you to control how much you're calculating within a particular scene range. By default, works pretty well. Final gather quality. I almost said final gather quality. Quality allows you to remove some noise, so you can actually remove some noise in here. Now there's a thing called screen traces. This is something I want to point out. Now there is a CVAR. I have to dig it up. There's a CVAR you can run to prevent any kind of weird glaring effect that may disappear as you move your camera around. You may see like a reflection kind of disappear. I may have already got the CVAR to just run all the time in here. But screen traces, what it does, it allows you to go in here, and you'll see it here, a little breakdown, whether to use screen space traces for lumen global illumination. So the screen space traces bypass lumen scene and instead sample scene depth and color. So this allows you to adjust some of that weird, like even your emissive stuff that's going on, to be able to calculate this and customize it a bit more. You'll see that there's two switches for it, so we can turn it completely off if we need to. The default is with both on, but it's up to you. Just gives you a little bit more control. So, excuse me, trying to clear my throat. So it helps with a little bit with your emissive objects, which we'll talk about in just a bit. You'll see that emissive object right there. All right. So back up, see, there it is. This is what I'm talking about. I'm going to move my screen and this goes away. So there's a CVAR that can prevent that from happening. Let me see if I can, maybe I did run it. Maybe I didn't run it on. Let me screen. Screen traces. Let me see if that's going to fix that. I'll put that at 0. Yep, that fixes it. There it is. Sean solved the problem. You turn them suckers off if you wanted to. Now you'll notice it's still kind of doing it if I go back into the settings for it here. But if you run this CVAR, you can get it to go. Now, CVARs, we'll be talking a bit more about them, and we're going to talk about this guy later. He's amazing. Console variables. If you don't see that in your Windows, pull down, you go to your plugins, and you turn on console variables. Excuse this sniffing, I apologize. And this guy's great. It allows you to not have to go to the output log constantly and type in CVAR. And for those that missed my CVAR, it was lumen reflections screen traces, and I set it to 0. That prevents that weird screen space type of scenario. Escape from CVAR land, escape. There you go. Cool. Just wanted to show you that because there's a weird type of screen space thing that happens. I don't know. I'm not sure why. It's very odd. So let's go back to it. So I showed you some quick tips to be able to manage and get rolling for your lumen. Let's look at a few more settings because before I dived into all the lights, I did want to show you this. I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but I wanted to keep things within context because we're talking about using lumen. So let's also talk about setting it up. You'll notice with lumen also, we have a thing called our max trace distance. So there's values that are too small will cause lighting to leak into large caves. So you can increase that if for some reason your light's leaking a bit. Some things to mention when it comes to lumen, some very good important quick tips. Make sure you're using thick pieces of geometry. Lumen likes logic, and what I mean by that is if you have an open, it breaks my brain. Just because for years they yelled at us and says, if you don't show it, you don't have to show the back side of it. So Lumen is the type where it likes to have a full piece of geometry in there, and you can punch it into something because it understands where one object begins and ends and allows to do the GI a bit better. So Lumen's okay with it and works pretty well and very performant. So having solid piece of geometry, building things like Legos, it's okay. It's all right. So no one's going to get mad at you. Obviously, you don't want to throw the kitchen sink at your scene. You want to make the hero objects higher poly and things that aren't as important lower poly. So those are things to keep in mind, but that's available for you. Now there's an advanced area here, which allows you to do speed refreshing in here. And there's also a diffuse color boost if things get a little bit dark. There's skylight leaking. This always reminds you of the ray trace evaluate light. This allows you to control darker areas and lighter areas with, say, interiors, and keeps the indoor from areas from going fully black. So you can control some of that if you need to. And full skylight leaking distance. So you can basically control how that's being calculated. And if I think the default works pretty darn well, but there will be times where you may want to mess with this a little bit. Excuse me.
Hey, Sean.
Larger values can create an ambient occlusion effect. Yeah.
This might go part and parcel with everything you're already discussing, but there's kind of a general question for how to eliminate noise when using Lumen. Everything from the shadows to the GI.
Yes. We're just going to get that in just a bit. Give me just a bit here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about reflections, and we'll talk a bit about noise. So down below, we have, I'm trying not to get too much buttonology, but these are things you kind of need to know. You'll notice in Lumen Reflections, we have quality ray tracing lighting mode. There's also screen traces here, which we talked about before. We're going to leave these off for now. I'm going to turn them both off. And we have high quality translucency reflections. So this is super helpful. But like we said, there are noise, right? We can turn all these on. We can mess with these. But you'll notice there's a roughness for the trace. Some of these are fairly new. Allows you to remove some of that. See that right there? So I can increase that if I wanted to or decrease it. So messing with this will get rid of some of your noise if you are noticing that noising is persistent. You can also do that within the material itself. So like this particular material, I believe I dumbed down his noise considerably. He isn't quite as shiny as this guy over here. So you can totally do that on a sub level if you wanted to. I'm trying to remember my workflow with that one for this if I did change this guy, but you totally can. And let's see if his material is different. Excuse me. Click on this guy. There you go. So excuse me for my coughing. So in this guy, if I wanted to, I can go into his roughness and I can adjust it. If I set it back to default, you can see it is less of a noise issue. But if I do Control Z and I mess it and put it back, you could end up getting noise, especially with like reflective surfaces. But that slider, you'll notice, helped out great. So if we go back to our post-process volume, that was a pretty great addition that we've put in there. Allows me to go in here and to control some of that. So again, my max roughness trace, if I increase this, you'll notice the noise starts to come in a bit. So I can increase or decrease according to my needs of my scene. Notice when it's really high, when you have highly reflective surfaces, this is where this is going to happen. So you can use this little slide bar or control it within the material itself, depending on, it's a use case thing. So depending on what you want to do, maybe you need a highly reflective surface for part of it, and then part of it you don't. 1 second. Oh, LA Air. I'm going to sell that cans of LA Air. So whenever you want that smoky voice, it's like advertisement. Max reflection bounces. You can control this too. I left mine by default. Don't really need more, but if I wanted to, I can mess with this. Now you'll notice, if you punch these numbers really high, the audience is really not going to be able to tell, but you can increase this. Notice it's changing with my numbers here. I'll do 5, but you'll notice as we go to 10, oh my gosh, look at the dramatic change. Not really. We went as high as 8. I don't think it'll go higher than 8. But if we do 1, that's 1, that's 2, you'll see a change. That's 3, slight change. 4, barely see anything. 5, forget about it. And then 6 and 7. So there's a point where the human eye is not going to really pick up those changes. I'll just put it back to 1. And that's up to you how you mess with those bounces. And then we have max reflection bounces here also. Reflection and refraction, excuse me. So this one is refraction. I'm sorry, guy. I'm sorry, Lumen. I don't mean to insult you. Your two brothers are different. And we can mess with that as the light bounces around for refraction. So this is all up to you how you control this. Don't get too lost in the weeds, though. Get your lighting set up basic and then focus on your gameplay. And then you can bring it and make things a bit more shinier and better, cooler, faster. All right. Any questions on that so far before I move on and talk more about, we're going to pick on Mr. Point Light because we started talking about him, but I've realized, let's talk about Lumen's setup because that's what he is the important guy on the block. Any questions on this so far? I take it that the silence is golden. I'm going to take the opportunity to sip some tea.
Yeah, I think you're good, Sean. There's one question I'm trying to parse, but I think I can answer it.
No problem. Thanks, man.
Doing great.
I'm having so much tea and coffee today. Where did Sean go in the middle of the lecture? He's in the bathroom. All right. So now let's take a look at this point light here. So the point light here, let's go to his details. Boom, boom, boom. So we have intensity. We have our CDs here, little candela units we're using that we can switch these at any time. I use the default. That's fine. I don't try to get too fancy with that. Attenuation, so we can control the influence area for the light. So the higher I go, and also based on the amount of strength of the light, because I can bump up the attenuation to forever. But if my light's really weak, it's not going to make a difference. But this just allows you to control the range on area of influence here. Now, like I mentioned before, there's source radius, and there's soft source radius, and there's source length. So if I mess with the source radius, I can actually let's put a box or something in here. Makes a little more sense. Go to shapes, cube. Hey, Mr. Cube. Let's move him down. I'm going to pick on you, Mr. Cube. There you go. There's his shadow receiving from the point light. So I can go to this point light, and if I wanted to source radius, bump this up, you'll notice the shadows become softer on that cube. It becomes a lot softer. So it's softening up that area. But you'll also notice there is a thing called, watch this sphere, watch the Unsphere here, called soft source radius. So if, say I'm getting a really tight hotspot on this light, I can increase that and blur that out. So if I want that reflectivity to be less, I can do so. There's also source length. So I can control the length of it. So I can make a poor man's lightsaber if I wanted to. So I can control all these kind of together. And I'll do that with my source radius. And I can make some quick office tube lighting. So if I've made geometry and it's emitting and I wanted the light to be a little bit stronger on it, like I didn't want to lean on the glow too much. Maybe it's a little bit of a smaller object. You got to be careful with that with glowing. I could put this tube lighting in there in my environment, and it works out pretty well. So you can control the shape. It's pretty great. And again, we see that shape coming through here, like, oh, right there. So again, I can go to my source, soft source radius, and I can soften that up a little bit. So I don't get that hot spot maybe as much. Don't get that shape as much. Now with baking, you got to be careful with this because you get a lot more noise sometimes, and your shadows they look a little more grainy. But in Lumen, it does a pretty decent job. There can be maybe a little bit of graininess, but anytime you're softening the shadow, you're going to get a little bit of that because you're basically just hammering it out. So it isn't taking on a solid shape, but more of a blurred shape. And before we go to the next slide, I want to point out glowing objects can give off light. Now, you got to be careful with this. Notice this is a pretty decent sized object, and it does a pretty great glowing effect here. And Unreal will take the color of a light or a glowing surface and bounce that around in our global illumination. We get some really nice reflection and refraction from glowing objects. Now, the problem you can run into is having small glowing objects. You're going to get some noise. I can show you that in the lab. I'm building this city scene right now for a project we're working on, and I'm getting some noise. I'm getting some reflective areas and some flickering. Some of it I got to be careful with. Some of it I don't really have full control of just because it's a large city scene and there's a lot of pieces. So just be aware of it. Small glowing objects, if they're too small, do not quite render really great. Now we've improved it a little bit, but it still can give you some issues. All right, so we talked about the lights. Let's take a look here. What other lights we got? We got a spotlight. So let's pick on the spotlight. I have one already set up over here. Hey, Mr. Spotlight. Hi, Sean. All right. Why does he sound like a puppet? I don't know. So we got Mr. Spotlight. Hello, Mrs. Spotlight. What if you had a puppet show with lights? That would be awkward. So this guy here, I'm able to control your standard control that you would get when it comes to your spotlight. So we have the intensity in units. We have the intensity overall, attenuation radius, inner color, outer color angle, source radius. So these things are kind of standard stuff, which is great. And we also have source length. So we can control these if we need to. Now, when you're dealing with this particular guy, if you want to be able to make things a bit softer, you can actually use your source radius to do so. So I can do that. Notice that when I hammer it down, we get these shadows, but if we soften it up, which makes it a little more believable, we can get that nice soft shadow on there. This is really up to you how you vision your spotlight to be a harsh type of spotlight or softer. You can actually control that there. Pretty great. Again, make sure your lights are movable if you're bringing it in and using Lumen. The other ones, such as static and stationary, are for baking and are not supported in this scenario. My favorite fellow, this is the rec light. This guy, again, I said like I use them a lot on working on the Netflix Love, Death, and Robots. That was a really great project, but I use this guy so much. And I'll tell you why, because he's a series of point lights within a rectangular shape. And in here, I can control the width, depth, and the width height. Now, don't make the mistake, and I've done this because working with Maya and 3D Studio Max, I would come in here and try to scale it here. Don't do that. You're just messing like with your default like attenuation radius. So just do it through here, and also your attenuation radius, do it through here, so you can increase the area of influence here. Kind of, pretty great to be able to do some. And we also have barn door. So I can control barn door here. So I can make it a focal area or make it a little open, wider. And we also have barn door length. So we can lengthen that. So this is a great, great, great fill light. Phenomenal. I use it in almost all my scenes. It's really, really fantastic. Pretty awesome sauce. Now it's one of the few lights where you can add a source texture. So if you wanted a texture mapped on that, like an office lighting or something, you can do so. Now, the problem you can run into though, we'll do this when we do our hero object in class part here. And I'll direct you to where we go. So in our lighting 103_1, in here, we have a hero object in class. We'll light towards the end of class. You'll notice that the shape will still come through on a reflection. And you'll notice we also don't have soft source. It's not here. So what you have to do is be very strategic, move things around, and maybe even dumb down the reflectivity of the object so you don't get this cube coming in. It isn't like 3D Studio Max where you can say, don't render source, because we're in real time. That's a little trickier, but just that's note to self as you go through with this. Let me see, what lights are we up? Skylight. Skylight is one of my favorites too. So Skylight is awesome. I got no friends. Skylight is really great in the fact that you can go in here. You want to turn on real-time capture. We can add a cube map. So this allows us to do like HDR type of stuff. So if I turn this off, this allows me to go in here and I can add a specified cube map, I can load an HDR backdrop if I wanted to, and it will use that to bounce around light. So you can use your environment or have a custom one, which is great. You have your source angle, cube resolution, sky distance threshold. So basically how far this is going to take from your point of interest. And again, if you don't know, did you guys know you can measure with your middle mouse button? You can do a quick measuring in Unreal Units what you need. So that could probably be helpful in that particular scenario. So that's a middle mouse drag. Intensity scale, light color, affects world, cast shadows. All these things you can control and are on by default. So make it happen. Now you'll notice this guy isn't on, but when you create him, he will be on. And there's just like, it's an old default where it used to be off. So you want to keep the real-time capture on if you're going to use them and not use a cube map. So just keep those things in mind. Cool. All right, so let's see what other lights we have yet to cover. HDR backdrop. I'm not going to talk too much about that one. You can activate that guy. I think he's on by default now. I don't think we have to do plugins anymore, but I might be wrong. HDR. Oh, there you go. So if you don't have them on, so you've got a template from the marketplace and you're trying to implement with our templates, you can turn it on. Say you're doing a test before you take it into the home base. You got to turn it on here. So my instincts kind of told me that might be it still, and that's fine. Also, we have the sun and sky, which you heard me talk about. This gives you this is a little bit again more architectural of that vein. I can't talk today. This just gives you like a compass. I'll put it in here, but I'm gonna have to get rid of it because it's gonna mess up our lighting. Completely hosed it. You can implement this when you do the environment light mixer. You can actually get this guy in the scene and connect him. But this gives you the ability to control latitude, longitude, time zone, time of day, and so forth. You can see there's a conflict. So if you have two directional lights, one of them needs to have forward shading on. So the Unreal knows which one is affecting your environment and which one is there just as, a filler. So you would just go into that directional light and type in forward shading priority, and you would click one on or off, whatever one you want to keep. It's up to you. You would do that for any particular one that you like more than the other per se, or et cetera, et cetera. Let me hit Control Z. Hey, back to normal. Notice there's a refresh too. When you change your lighting, Lumen will refresh. So give it some time. So don't be impatient. It doesn't do it automatically. It does try to do the bounce calculation. Any questions so far on what we've talked about? Because we have now covered, ladies and gentlemen, all the lights you're going to play with.
No immediate questions, but ask now if anyone wants to.
No problem. These are stuff you could talk about by the punch bowl at a party as everybody walks away. You're like, you just know the directional light is really great, but if you have two and the forward shade needs to be, and then you're like, where are you going? That's me at a party. I use that joke way too much. Come back. Yeah, the awkward Sean. All right, I'm still awkward. That's okay. I embrace it. So we have this all set up here. We're playing with the lights. Now, again, a emissive is required in the material. Now, if you missed that yesterday, some of the nodes I mentioned, but I didn't go and show you necessarily how to hook it up. In this particular case, it's just a simple multiplier with a strength, taking the color from this 3 constant vector. And again, if you're not sure of the nodes I have, use that Control Alt when you can, and you can actually see what they do and how they work. Don't get frustrated if they don't work on material functions. Those are a bit deeper. Those are basically materials with functionality, so they won't be a write-up for it because Unreal doesn't know unless you put some sort of descriptor in there. So yeah, this is all that is. Just a multiply, just a strength right into the emissive color, and I hit apply and save, and I got this little guy. And as I increase this guy will get stronger. Now there's a logic with this though. And what I mean by that, if something has a very bright glow, you will lose some color. Unreal does it a little bit more extreme. And what I mean by that is, say we set this to 10, and you'll see that you're losing color from the object, but you are still getting the color on the environment. So that kind of happens a bit in the real world. Like my wife has a yellow light for her plants, but if we if we turn that on and we make it stronger, it's going to get a little more whiter. But in the real world, it does that less than it does in Unreal. So just keep that in mind. It still retains its color a bit more in the real world than it does in Unreal. So just bear with that here and just keep that in mind there. I'll set that back to 1. There you go. Cool. All right. So let's go back to slides. So we talked about all the different ways to work with these lights. We talked about the difference between mobility. Static and stationary is for baking. Movable is for fully dynamic. And when using Lumen, you want to be in movable mode. Now, when it comes to stationary, if you are messing with baking, and I'll try to remind you guys of this in the lab, is the fact that you can only have 4 overlapping at a time, those that want to get into baking. But I do recommend you use Lumen. It's going to save you some speed, and speed is key in this particular fellowship. It's going to, as I say, save you speed, save you time. It's going to save you time so you don't have to take speed. That's pretty much what I really probably meant. Don't do tricks. But it'll keep you from wasting time, I should say. Gets you up and running with your lighting quickly. And again, unless your game has a lighting tool set within the gameplay, get that lighting set in, even if it's basic, and you can get back to it later. Focus on the meat of getting assets and gameplay going. All right, so we talked about Lumen already. I made sure I jumped on that guy. So again, Lumen is our Unreal 5's fully dynamic global illumination. It works fantastic. The GI provides infinite diffuse bounces. It's a little history. Now, the Three Musketeers, I'm going to point this out. When using Lumen, you want to use Nanite. You want to use Nanite, and you want to use virtual shadow maps. Now, I'm not sure if Nanite, in this particular case, Unreal is forgiving because I don't have a lot of complexity in my scene. So I left these as simple did I leave them as simple non-Nanite objects? Let's see. I may have just rushed it and said, nah, I got to get this done. Let's go to it. I didn't follow my own advice. There you go. Right click. Is he nanite? He is nanite. Oh, I did follow my own advice. So these nanite objects just make it so that we are not having to worry about shuffling through LODs on an object level. We're think of it as LODs on a triangular level. So it's only drawing the detail as needed. And this is why it's more efficient. So you want to use the Three Musketeers. You want to use nanite. You want to use Lumen, and you want to use virtual shadow maps, all working together for the best performance scene. And it's actually pretty cool. And I may not have converted all of these pieces. I'm being fancy and just selected one. I'm all, you don't know. What you don't know won't hurt you. But you do want to have it in your scene if you're using Lumen to have Nanite everywhere. And it's easy. And if you remember us talking about it, you can simply go to an object, any object, right click on it, go to Nanite, and turn it on. Cool. All right, let's get back to slides. So again, we talked about emissive surfaces. You got to be careful when they're small. If they're small, you're going to get noise, and it's not going to look so great. I want to point out too, if you look in this image, there's some noise on these windows. Partially, some of this was done on purpose. As you can see, it's noisy down below, but not up top. You do got to be careful. Some of your reflective surfaces, if there's rough in there, like we talked about, adjust your rough, or in the Lumen slider, you can control some of that, which is some of our new settings that have come in recently. Lumen solves indirect, specular, or reflections for the full range of material roughness and values. This is why it shines. It actually reads your materials pretty darn great, and can even do clear coat, like for a car, does it really, really great. Now, before, people would lean towards a ray tracing to do that, but now you can do it with Lumen, which is pretty fancy talk. It replaces your skylight, AO, unshadowed, screen space GI, ray tracing GI, and third-party GI solutions. So it's actually pretty fantastic. Ooh, I love this scene. It's fantastic. It looks so good. You'll notice if you did lower the environment light, you would get a stronger glow just because it's logical GI bouncing going on. Pretty cool. We talked about setting it up already, so you guys are good with that. Ping me if you run into any problems. And this part I want to mention, this I didn't edit this in my notes. Do not turn off your allow static lighting. Now, the reason why, and I don't think we solved it, I may bite my tongue and it might have been solved by last week, but let's give it a shot. You can do this when this is working. The problem I ran into, and I had to make a JIRA ticket for it, is when I turned that off, my GI and my shadows didn't quite line up correctly, and my shadows and my dark areas are really super dark. So we didn't quite have that nailed down yet. And that's because it was a Quixel. This is mainly for the Quixel assets. So it may work for this scene if we do it, but for the Quixel assets, you may run into really dark areas. So in that case, don't worry about turning this off. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if we go into our scene and we go to the project settings and we type in allow static lighting, if I turn this off, it's going to require a restart. Let's hit restart. And let's see if the black is going to go black. Yes. We're going to do a quick restart here. Let's see. There we go. Let's see. Did my darks get dark? So it looks like it's working pretty good. It's did just dandy. Now, again, if I had a Quixel asset, I don't think I have one. You would probably get some darker, really harsh dark areas. If that happens, just go back in there and turn that off. And the whole reason we tell you to do that is so that we're getting a pure calculation of with no misgivings using any kind of extra previous calculations in here that actually may give you some trouble. Allow static lighting, dude. There he goes. So again, if you're running into this problem with a Quixel, it's a problem with the Quixel tool. It needs to be programmed in such a way so that it updates the AO in the material so that the AO and the areas that aren't getting light, those self-shadowing areas are not harsh, super dark. They give that they take into account the bouncing. And I found out a few months ago that wasn't doing that, and I had to write a ticket for it. So if you did run into that, just turn that back on. You should be okay. Should be okay either way. We just give you some advice on that. So if you want a pure, amazing calculation of lumen, you can mess with those. All right. So again, take this with a grain of salt, especially if you're using some Quixel assets. Turn this back on if you're noticing once you turn these off, things are too dark. We talked about lumen scene quality, detail, view distance, final gather, max trace distance, scene capture, catch resolution scale. So I need to update this a bit because they have added a few things since last time I wrote this with the new releases. So like I said, what we have new, if we go to our post-process volume, scroll down just a tad. You will notice, too far, pull up. Lumen reflections are pretty standard, but we do have screen traces, which is fairly new. And we also have under lumen, again, we have the screen traces. So there's just a couple things that I might have left out, but for the most part, things are pretty steady as she goes. You will see advanced. This is again for speeding things up. So only use this if you really need to, but it makes it so that whenever you change your lighting, it doesn't take a long time. It makes it a little bit faster. And again, those are GPU expensive. So keep in mind your graphics card overall. All right. So yep, and we talked about reflection control and setting the right reflections here. So we talked about ray trace mode, array lighting mode, and high quality translucency reflections. So HIT is going to give you some better stuff if you want to use that. I like to when I can. I am spoiled. I have a really beefy graphics card and a semi-beefy graphics card on my personal computer, and they allow me to do so. Although my personal ones can be a little bit of a butt because it gets hot, it gets a little overheated. So let's talk about some of these visualizers real quick. So to be able to get these visualizers to work, you do want to make sure your SM6 is on. That's going to be very supportive. And if you wanted any kind of progress bar, like say you were GPU baking versus CPU baking, regular baking, you want to make sure that your virtual texturing is on. In this case, we're just doing Lumen, so we don't have to worry about that as much. But let's go ahead and look at some of these viewers, and kind of gives you a visual representation. Now, can you optimize and fix things without it? Mostly you can see any issues that occur, but this gives you a little bit under the hood, which can be very helpful. So if I go to my Nanite visualizer, I can do an overview. This is going to show me where my nanites begin and end and how it's working. So it shows me the clusters, it shows me the triangles. Now the triangles draw as they get closer in and out. Now you're probably wondering, why is that flickering? That I'm not quite sure, because it's a simple piece of geo, but apparently maybe I have two stuck on top of each other. Maybe that's the issue. I'm not sure. But you can see that it actually will try to edit things according to what we have. And it'll try to update on the fly. And you'll see we have several different things to look at: clusters, instances, primitives, overdraw, and material ID. All these things are in here, so you can just get a quick evaluation of how your light's doing and if it's giving you any issues. So let me go ahead and go back to our let's go to Lumen now. We like that nanite. And I'm doing the overview just to speed things up a little bit. So the overview here we also can do for our Lumen. This shows us our reflection hardware ray tracing with lighting. And it shows us our over here to the right, Lumen scene. Pink is the missing surface catch coverage. Yellow is called surface catch. So if there's any issues, like I'm missing any surface catch information, it's not rendering correctly, this gives you that quick look for it. And over here is just simply your geometry normals. Just shows you that your normals are being rendered correctly, and everything seems to be doing just fine with this scene. But these are just quick overviews to see if there's any issues that may be occurring. Now I'm going to give you a scene lighting Lumen. I'm going to put the link in the lecture notes here. There is a really great updated, we just recently updated this about a month ago on Lumen. I think is it Lumen Performance Guide? Yes. And I'm going to put this in here. Let me put it in the lecture notes. This is a pretty darn good guide for you guys, covering a few of the things I talked about. Now, in that performance guide, you also can do scalability settings. Remember we talked about that? And that's one of the first things it talks about. So you can change it. Mine's all on cinematic, but you can tell Unreal to give you an auto kind of like, estimate based on your graphics card and your RAM and all that. It'll do a option for it. Now I can change everything to epic if I wanted to, or even just high. But if you need to dumb those down, you have those options. It's one of the first things you can definitely do. Talks a bit more about hardware ray tracing and tips. So, and we talked a bit about some of those tips when it comes to reflections and working with that. And it gives you it gets a little bit more into the weeds, and it shows you some scripting if you want to swap things out, use screen space instead of reflectivity for Unreal. I actually like the reflectivity in Lumen, but man, I've been on such beefy computers, I may be a bit spoiled. So up to you. Look at that, take it with a grain of salt. Your situation may not require all those tips, and it may. It just depends on where you're at. All right, let's get back to it. So Lumen visualizers, Lumen generates an automatic parameterization. Now I can't believe on the recording I actually pulled this off, of the nearby scene surface called surface catch, used to quickly look up lighting at ray hit points in the scene. Lumen captures the material properties for each mesh from multiple angles called cards and are generated offline for each mesh. And you can see that if we can run that, we can see the card. So let's actually use Lumen visualize card placement. And you can see that. Let's do that real quick. We'll do the output log. Lumen visualize card placement, and we'll just hit 1. And this shows you how it's calculating these this information via these boxes which are around these objects. And then we'll turn that off. Up arrow, make a 0. Up arrow in the output log allows you to go back to the one that you typed in. Now, we talked about console variables. Console variables, and I showed you can turn on through via plugins. This allows you to be able to do, see, notice I already have it loaded. I don't have to type in there all the time. I can just say, hey, card on, card off. And I can run this the way that I want. And you can set it through presets. I can say, hey, there's a new card variable. There's another console variable, awesome. So if I wanted awesome, this gives me a bunch of things I can use using these CVARs. Now, Edward pointed this out to you. To be able to get to these, you can go to, under help, there is a console variables, and this is installed locally on your machine. And that's all I did was load them in. I grabbed a bunch of Lumen ones I thought were nifty and tricky and awesome. And I loaded them in, and then I went back to Unreal. And I punched them in via the console variable. And then now I can adjust these. And these are all the settings that I like on mine. I have my mesh cards per task, set that to 128. Now, it will tell you what the default is, too, when you punch them in. So if I bring in another console variable, let's see. Let's go to outputs here. I'm trying to think, what's a good one? Lumen. Let's go to call grid pixel size. This allows you for to control maybe some larger areas. I'm going to hit copy. So if I go to console here and I punch this in and enter, it's going to tell me what the default is for that. It says it's 64. But I can adjust that, change that to what I want, and then save over that preset. So when I load Unreal, I actually have the settings that I need and want for my scene. So that's actually kind of nice. So getting those reflection settings are tricky, and you can get some pretty decent ones, but you can still get noise. That's one thing. Like I said, I wasn't going to start talking about it. You can still get some noise. So that's the one thing you got to be careful with. You're never necessarily going to get rid of all your noise. Notice this is pretty high in reflectivity here. And actually, let's change it. I said I wasn't going to talk about it. Look what you've done, Alex.
Sorry.
I'll talk a little bit about it, but I want to talk. We can talk about it a little bit more later because there are some GI cool stuff you can get. So, so if I go and set this to mirror, notice this is pretty great, but you'll notice we're still getting a high amount of noise. We are getting GI in the reflectivity. You don't normally get that with ray tracing. What does bug me though, you get this dark horizon. I forgot how to fix that, but there is a dark horizon. This does happen sometimes with ray tracing too, but overall there's a good amount of believability there. We remove that roughness, but if we go into the post-process volume, look how great it looks from far away. So you get close, it starts to break down. We can go in here under our reflection method or reflection area. We can, let's look directly at it here. Look into its eyes when you edit it. We can play with maybe the screen traces here a bit, but that's mainly going to support the glowing like we talked about. So we want to bump up our quality. That's going to get rid of some of the noise. And it's got rid of quite a bit, except for some of the darker connecting areas. This is where I've noticed the noise happens quite often. But we can mess with our max rate, roughness to trace. So we can try to bump that up to just a bit more. And we're still getting noise on some of these darker regions. So reflection bounces, let's maybe play with that. So if I go to 2, that is alleviating some of it down here, but it hasn't fixed it up here. What if we went to 3 or maybe 5? You'll notice, like I said before, as you get past a certain point, your eye's not going to notice, like I mentioned before. But let's look at this here for refraction, this can be a little bit supportive, but is not in the reflection. This is more of bounce light and so forth. So that may help on the side, but you're always going to get a bit of noise on these surfaces. You really are. And especially for emissive materials. Notice this cloud. Now, what I mean by that is if I had a small piece of geometry, let me see if I can fake this real quick. Look at this. I said I wasn't going to talk about this. I went and talked about it. My bad. Let's say a cube. This cube, I'm not even going to make it glow, but if I made it glow, it would make it worse, is really thin. Let's change our scale evaluation here. So he's really, really thin. And you got to be careful with this. This is a little bit off topic of reflections, but it's something that became an issue. I was talking to clients about this, and it does bug me because it's not quite fixed yet. I don't think I can make this thin enough, so we're going to have to turn this off as I scale this down really tiny. You got to be careful with reflective emissive surfaces. Again, it's a little bit off topic. You can get flickering if it's in front of a glowing surface. Let me see if it's going to do it. There you go. See that flickering? There's a little flickering going on because it's thin. Notice it's in front of the cloud, but if I go away from the cloud, I go pure sky, it's not flickering. So there's a little bit of a sorting issue when it comes to emissive and refracted objects with thin objects in front of them. So you got to be careful with that. That's one thing with virtual production, and even I tell the game clients to watch out for, because up close, it's not too bad. But you'll notice it's also trying to calculate the bounce on the thin object. So you just got to be careful and be aware of those things. And if it's reflective, that's not going to be helpful. It could get worse. Just let you know. So hopefully that helps out a little bit. We can maybe dive a little bit deeper into that later. But we got a pretty decent output here. But you'll notice there's noise. What we can do is the objects that are in the scene that are giving us a bit of noise. Ooh, notice some of the noise has gone away. Maybe it was just a little bit of refresh and change of angle. That does occur sometimes when you change your angle because it's looking at the GI. That may happen. But what we could do, if this is a reflective surface bouncing into a reflective surface, I could change the material of these pillars so they don't give noise. So it looks like they're the only ones right now that are giving us noise. And we're actually pulled it off. That's pretty slick. It's not too bad. But these guys are the culprits and maybe a bit of the clouds. But those are things to think about. I told you guys I wasn't going to do it, but I did. I had to. I knew this would happen. That's why I was like, maybe later. Okay, now. You forced my hand. So hopefully that answers your question.
Great. Thank you, Sean.
No problem. I don't know why I went on the emissive. That just bugs me with the clouds. It's just that emissive thing is something to consider. And hey, yeah, most of our noise is gone except for this reflective jerk in the background and a little bit of the floor. It's always the darker areas. All right, cool. Now let's move on. Oop. And there you go. Slide deck. So you can increase the cards on the object here, but I also want to point something out too. You can also do it in the you can do it via I should say you can do it via the output log, CVARs, or you can do it through the actual object itself. So what that means is if I grab this floor and I'm noticing that the shadows and the I'm noticing that the lighting isn't really calculating as well as I want. This can happen with maybe some more complicated material objects. I can double click on that static mesh. Let me type in cards. There's a max lumen mesh card. So I can go in here and increase that if I need to. Now 12 typically works pretty well. But if you're noticing there's some areas where it's not quite working, there's some pink areas or whatever, when you have it display for you in the Lumen visualizer, you can increase this number if you needed to. But default should work pretty well, but we give you that option because we want you to be able to have power to be able to control things. Tips and tricks and reminders. Lumen reflections support more than one bounce when Harbor ray tracing is on, so that's why you want to turn that on.
is enabled with hit lighting and the max reflection bounces. Setting in the post-process volume gives you that hammer you need to do what you need to do, so 2 or greater. But remember, there's a certain point where you may not see any major changes. Your eyeball won't pick it up, so don't crank that up higher than you need to. Just it's not necessary. This can prevent black areas and reflections when there is not enough. So we could bump ours up a little bit. Unfortunately, I don't think that horizon line is going to change so much. I haven't had a whole lot of luck, but if for some reason you guys find a magic number, let me know. Lumen reflections can be used with Lumen GI for games, and we saw that. We see our GI bounce in there, which is fantastic. Lumen reflections. Let me see if there's anything else. Lighting automatically as lumen surface catch optimized not available. So overall, it's pretty much the same thing I've been telling you guys. So static lighting can't be used with lumen. It doesn't do anything. So you want to make sure you're using some movable lights. I'm going through my head if I'm missing anything as I go through these. I'm trying to think, did I leave anything out? Lumen hardware ray tracing, that's what that acronym stands for, if you're wondering. Including enabled sync compute for hardware ray tracing by default on consoles. We're not really going to a console, but that's just a note I put in there for my game clients, so they know that that's there. And Lumen overview visualization mode. 5.3, a view of the geometry normals and the lumen scene, making it easier. We're in 5.4, so I probably could remove that note. That gives you the ability to look at those. And reflection visualizers, now added for visualizing and debugging reflection rays. And there's AO update. So it was previously applied on top of emissive and direct lighting. Now it is doing some great things. And Lumen does not support static lighting, like I mentioned earlier, so make sure all your lights are movable. All right, some tips and tricks and reminders. Source angle directional light will soften your shadows. Source radius on local light will soften your shadows. And local light being point light and spotlight, etc., etc. Software ray tracing mode controls which tracing method Lumen uses when ray tracing the scene. Detail tracing, and we talked about global tracing. Detail tracing gives you the best results. Global tracing gives you a dumbed down version. Support hardware ray tracing enables ray tracing from supported operating systems. So if your graphics card can do it, turn it on. It'll be great. You'll love it. It'll look great. All right, nanite and virtual shadow maps. So we talked a bit about nanite off and on between the different classes. You've heard Ed talk about it. You've heard me chat a little bit about it. Again, nanite is great because it's like an LOD. You can think of it this way. It's an LOD control on a triangular level, and it really does a really great job. So basically pulls in the detail, looking at the actual detail instead of swapping out the model, which is fantastic. Again, it gives you higher visual detail, fidelity, and works well with Lumen. So nanite does not, I mean, you can use nanite with baking. You can. Why? Because it might take your bake a long time. Unreal's not going to judge you. It's not going to stare at you with a creepy eye and judge you. But you can, again, it's made mainly for virtual shadow maps and Lumen. So again, virtual shadow maps, where they shine, where they're fantastic. Well, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but virtual shadow maps allow us to be able to pull in the high quality shadow. It's basically like virtual texturing and like nanite. It pulls the high quality when needed based on positioning in the 3D world. It's actually pretty great. Do not use LODs with Lumen. To avoid that at all costs. And the reason why too is because it's not performant. They're not made for each other. You could think of it as Lumen and virtual shadow maps are so made for each other. They're just gonna have little nanite babies everywhere. So they really work well with each other. So yeah, try to avoid that if you can. Again, it's visually accurate than displacement and less shadow artifacts. So you can see an example here off to the right. The one at the top is the old school LOD, baking, and regular light maps. Down below we have nanite, so we can bring in a higher resolution model. We're using virtual shadow maps, and we're using Lumen, and you can see it's actually quite different. So nanite supports explicit tangents in the data format and runtime. So inside of your geometry, you can Edit a few things if you needed to. By default, it works pretty good, but it relies on tangent space that is implicitly derived in the material based on the screen space vision and UV gradients. So it really tries to look at the geometry, and it looks at where everything is positioned. It looks at your data and your texture information, your UVs, and it looks at also the shape, and then it'll draw those things according to your position in the world. But let me point out a few of these. I'm not going to get too much in the weeds because I do like to talk about this crap. I'm going to go to Nanite. And you'll notice we have some Nanite control. Now, whenever you enable Nanite, this is automatically going to go on. Older versions of Unreal required like a 3-step check-in system. No longer a thing. You can now add it as you need to. You can do the explicit tangents like we talked about. If you notice things aren't performing like you need, you can control position precision for the calculation. Auto works really well, but you can choose it on a centimeter basis. I know this is getting a little more advanced, but if you are running into any Nanite issues, this gives you control. I'm going to leave it at that because I usually teach this for a little bit more of the advanced side, and you guys can get caught up in the weeds with your geometry and never finish your game. But I'm going to tell you, these resources are here to be able to add more visual fidelity. There's even a displacement map. I'm not going to get into those, but I'm going to point these out. This gives you some control, but I'm going to tell you, out of the box, it works really great. So don't get too caught up in the weeds on that. I'm going to avoid that because some of you guys could be like me and you're like, it must be perfect. And then you realize you just have one player in a world of boxes, and that's going to not be helpful. So using Nanite, we talked about you can right click and convert an object to Nanite. It's that simple, and Auto does it for you. You do want to turn on virtual. It's not required for virtual textures, but if you have a larger scene that has a lot of, maybe it's got a lot of textures in there and you want to keep things nice and smooth for the player, then you want to maybe turn on some virtual texturing. It does make your scene file a bit bigger because virtual texturing allows you to go back and forth. Now, if you're not sure how to convert something to virtual texturing, let's talk about that for a second. It's a little bit on the material side, but one, you can go to the project settings and you can turn on virtual texturing. I don't think I have it on in here. This is not a complicated scene. Oh, I do. So virtual texturing support is on. And then any objects, textures you can go to. So I can go to any of these textures, right click on it, and I can convert this guy to a virtual texture. Now, when you do, a menu is going to pop up and it's going to ask you what asset you want to do it to. Do you want to do it to all of them? And it's going to ask you what your resolution is. So if I do convert, I'm not going to click on it. It's going to start trying to look at everything, and it takes a bit of time. But you'll get a little mini menu that pops up, and then you can edit it from there. Pretty cool. I figured if I'm going to talk about it, I should point where it goes. Fallback target tangents. We talked about this. Again, don't get lost in the weeds on this one. This allows you to be able to control and edit things according to what you need. This fallback, again, you can look at percentage triangles or relative. The auto works really great. But again, if you have some hard edges that aren't quite displaying, or it's really high detail and it's not displaying correctly, you can edit these. There's a Nanite. Now, I mentioned this in one of our labs. So if you want to find out something that isn't Nanite, in your search bar, in your area where you type in your searching at the top of your content browser, you can type in Nanite enable false. This has taken the place of, we used to have a Nanite debugger. We got rid of it, and this is using it. We just figured, why have another menu when you can simply just type in this and you can find out what isn't Nanite. It's really just what that is for. Virtual shadow maps, we talked about how great they are. They are amazing because what happens is you have an amazing looking context shadow, and you can see the shadow deprecate and dissolve and become faded away from the point of contact, which is fantastic. And it does it better than our other shadowing methods. Now, that some people will argue, some people like ray tracing better, but performance wise, if we're looking at performance plus quality, virtual shadow maps is got ray tracing a bit beat there. So you're able to do that there. Now, again, made for Lumen mainly. You can hear me barking about that. So you want to stick with Lumen with that. Otherwise, things aren't going to work out. Again, virtual textures deal with similar issues as virtual shadow maps. So it only pulls up what is needed when needed. You can see that it actually catches a really high resolution at a low cost. And you can see a little bit of the numbers here, bit of the math under the hood that I'm throwing at you. I want to give us some time to do some interactive stuff here. So this is just some of the breakdowns so you can understand the concepts on how this works, directional lights, shadow comparison, mip map versus clip map, how we actually have Lumen performing much better than the old school way. And then you do have control using some CVARs. And again, I'm not going to run these CVARs because it's a little bit higher end. And some of you guys, I don't want you to get too lost in the weeds. I'm just feeding your nerd hunger. And I want us to interactively do some things because you may not always need these because out of the box, Unreal Lumen works pretty great. But if you run into problems with larger worlds, you can use some of these CVARs. Cool, and you can see some of it in action here. All right. Virtual shadow maps can now respect the nanite call distance, even when shadow catching is enabled. And per primitive flag that gives the user control over shadow invalidation behavior. These may come into play a little bit more for a larger world, for things that you're calculating, and you're wanting to make sure that your shadows are all reading correctly. So we talked about this. There is not only the cards, but you can also control distance, field, resolution, scale. So if you notice that that object doesn't have a high enough resolution for the shadows, you can go into that object settings as well as into the render settings. You can do it overall sweeping, but you can also do it within the object itself under distance, field, resolution, scale. You can increase that if you need to. Now, be careful because as you increase this, it does become more and more memory. It needs more memory to be able to do this. So only do it as needed. So just tread with caution. All right. So we looked at looking at virtual. We looked at virtual shadow maps up close for editing. We can look real quickly at the visualizer, and the visualizer just supports what you're editing. So you're basically looking at how things have changed and how things are being calculated. Will you always use the visualizer? I said that before. Maybe not very much. It's up to you. Now you can see your shadow mask doesn't have anything here. Let me see, clip mask, MIP level. Is none of this going to show up today? Come on. It's not going to show anything. Let me double check. My virtual shadow maps are on, so let me make sure I don't have anything off. Yeah, virtual shadow maps. And we have SM6. So it's just acting weird today. Yeah, why isn't it doing that? That's when I ran into problems before where it would show up because I didn't have my SM6 on to be able to properly display it. Huh. I had this happen before, and I try to remember what I did to fix it. I don't remember. Yours might be working, guys, but mine doesn't want to work today. It's on. We know we have Lumen on, so weird. Okay, that's fine. I forgot. It happened to me before. I can't remember what I did to fix it, though. That's all good. All right, so we're going to create in a blank project. We're going to create and light a hero object. Let's do this. This is the fun part. This is what I've been trying to get to because it's so much fun. So in our folder called Lighting 103, that's like our intro class I typically teach, you'll find a hero object. Now open this up in class and double click on that folder. So in this folder, you're going to see a hero end and a hero begin here, VST. So let's look at end first. Let's look at what we're supposed to do. Don't save. Coffee sipping time. Oh, that's so great. It's like nuclear fuel in a cup. Oh, I see somebody's question about, hey man, if LODs don't work good, characters, right? Ask about characters. Well, we've made it in such a way so they do work in the character level better than geometry. The problem is when you start dumping a bunch of LODs inside, that's where the performance goes. If you just have a character running around, that's not that bad. But if you have like mountains and trees, because you can nanite everything now, landscape, trees, you can nanite, mountains, you can nanite, and that's happy place. That's Lumen's happy place. But characters are not too bad. They work pretty darn well. We have them optimized in such a way, even when there's a lot of characters on screen, they're optimized in such a way they work really nice. But the using the LEDs for everything else is just not good. Yes, and 5.5, as Gabriel has said, shh, it's our secret. We already told everybody. I think it's on the roadmap. 5.5 has it so that we're going to have it so you can have Lumen with that. So here's my techno space scene. It'd be my little cyberpunk. I hit the G key if I want to hide all my widgets and just take a look at it. Shiny. Super shiny space thing. We're going to have some fun with lights and stuff. So this is one of the Quixel Mixer vehicles from a while back. Now you can light this any way that you want. Nobody has to light it the way that I'm doing it. And yes, Alex just posted a amazing, here comes everybody coming at you, nanite guys. I'm actually kind of glad they're doing that because you know how detailed the characters are going to be now. Like I got excited. I just peed a little bit. It's just that's just great. A dog that's way too excited. Oh my gosh, nanite. It's just gonna be awesome. It's gonna be awesome. All right, so let's go to the scene that has nothing. Nothing. We're gonna go to Hero VST. Click on that. Don't save. All right, so we're gonna do this kind of slightly lightning speed, but I'll help you through it, and I'll give you guys the 10 minutes we need to unwind before we go to the labs. We're gonna probably just keep this Zoom open. So we have nothing in here. Let's go ahead and create a light. So I'm going to go to that cube with the plus on there. I'm going to go to lights and I'm going to start with my favorite and yours, Rick Light. Boop. I always talk about how I use this guy everywhere and he's awesome. And I do. He's really great. All right. Where is he? Where did he go? Oh, hit the G key again. G key. There he is. He's inside the spaceship. Let's pull him out. Now you can really, if you want to, really make this moody. And let's do that. Let's go in more in the moody vein. So I'm going to go ahead and change the source width. Remember, don't scale it up in the scene. And I've changed the material on this space thing so it's not so reflective, so we don't see the shapes of the lights. So you can do that too if you want to. Edit it any way you want. Bring back the reflectivity if you need. A little bit of the height here. I'm going to change the color here. I'm going to make it red. Ooh, cyberpunky. So cyberpunky. And I'm going to hit the space bar and I'm going to lower this here. And actually going to lower the amount to like 3. Actually, let's do 6 at least. There we go. And again, you can do this any way you want. Actually, you know, I got to say, I did like the 8. I did like the 8, so we'll keep it at 8. Now, again, anytime you move stuff, you can change it from world up here, see my pulsing cursor, to local if you want to. And that'll give you the local axes. So that's kind of cool. We'll go back to world. Let's move this over. There you go. Now with it closer, I could probably dumb it down to at least 6. There we go. And let's get a little more rim lighting. Again, change your light to movable. You're like, well, Sean, every time I movable, it doesn't look like a big difference. It actually does in the end, believe it or not. Especially when you bring in other items and other things are going to be bouncing light. You want to have that all calculated together. This is going to give you the best results overall. It may seem like it's not doing anything. It's because Unreal's waiting for you to tell him how to calculate it. We're going to need a post-process volume. Do we have one? I don't think we do. Let's do that and get Lumen active. So let's go ahead and click on our post process volume. I'm just going to type and look for it because I'm lazy. In here, we want to scroll all the way down. And I forgot to mention this before. Some of you guys may not be familiar with post process volume or have missed some of us nerding out about this. You want to turn on infinite extend unbound. Turn that on. That's going to affect everything in your world. Otherwise, you're going to have to scale this to the area of where your camera's at, where your player is going to be at, so that the people watching or working and playing on your game can actually see where things you can get all your lighting settings encapsulated. But turning on that infinite extend unbound makes it that it happens everywhere. We're going to turn on Lumen. We know Lumen's on because it's in our project settings. We'll turn on reflections here. We'll just turn all these on for now. There we go. And we're not going to worry about screen space. That's different. So we're not going to mess with that in this particular case. Let's turn on our GI though. Forgot about that. It's kind of important. I'm going to close this advanced. Actually, no, yeah, we'll turn this on too. We'll make it so it refreshes. Turn this all on. Screen traces, max traces. Now let's increase. These are two things you do need to consider, especially if things aren't looking really great. You want to turn on your screen space lighting quality. I'm going to turn that up to 2. I'm going to turn on my lumen detail. This can get rid of some of our noise here. And final gather too. We'll get rid of some of that noise that may occur in some darker regions. There we go. Pretty cool so far. Everybody got that so far? Thumbs up? Okay. Sweet. All right, so now let's go ahead and put in some more lights. I'm actually liking this one better than the other one. The other one looked like candy. Let's go here and go to lights. We're going to go to rec light. We're going to pull this rec light up. And we're going to we're going to change a few things. So we're going to change the width and a little bit of the height. We're going to increase his strength. And we're going to rotate him. I might have the strength too high right now. Too high! It's God mode! Oh God! So we'll change that. Move this back. We can do some cheesy rim lighting. And lower that from 25. 25 is too high. Do some rim lighting there. And again, do some pink if we want to. Or mute it a little bit. So it's a little more whitish pink. There we go. Pretty cool. So we got our key light. We got a little bit of a rim light here. If we want to, we can do a little more of a backlight if we wanted to. And I'm going to do one more fill, and I think we're good, and we can hit a break. So we got to make sure that's movable too. And let's go and make another light. We'll do another rec light. Now you can do a point light if you wanted to, but I find rec lights a little bit easier to work with. I like them. I mentioned 1,000 times that. Do you remember that time I told you I used it from this project? Because I think they're great. That was a creepy voice. I apologize, everybody. Source width. And a little bit of source height. Change that color to whatever you want it to be. Blue seems to be pretty sweet. I like that blue. So we keep that. Make it movable. And let's move it up. And rotate it. And it's like, I just realized we made America, spaceship, America, red, white, and blue. So, and you can see the glow is working pretty good. And if you want to highlight that glow, we can add one more light for underneath. Let me hit the G key to get the widgets back. We can do a light here, a point light. Pull this one down. Whoop. Move this over here. Change that color. We can pluck the color or just mainly just make it blue here. And increase it a little bit so it's a little ridiculous. Hit the G key, see what we got. Techno. There we go. We're done. We're done. Look at that. I forgot to make it movable. Make it movable. Cool. I am a man of many voices. I used to do game. I used to do game voice work. You won't remember the games. They're just like small indie stuff. The Robin Williams. That's not the first time I've heard that. All right. So we are done. We're done. So you guys hopefully had some fun. We're gonna in the lab. We'll answer a few questions. I'm gonna slip in some environment lighting. Like we'll do like a little fog environment. I'll walk you through some of the stuff in there. That doesn't necessarily have to be all hands-on. You can play. It's a little playground for you to play with. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully this answered a lot of your questions. I see Kyle's nailed it. So it's completely up to you how you want to play with these. And again, these are all yours to play with. These scenes, you can use the assets. I don't care. A lot of these are just epic. I think in this particular case, I didn't really build anything on these. All right. So lab, there were some lab questions. We can address those first, and then we can kind of get into the weeds a little bit. I'll talk to you about how you can craft a similar scene I have here. It's actually not as hard as it looks. The only hard part you could run into is when making volumetric. Oh man, my computer's really slow right now. Let me close a few things on my end too. Gmail close. Believe it or not, Gmail will eat up a lot of your memory, believe it or not. I'll be able to know that. Close that crap. So one of the bigger or harder things for this particular environment, and we'll address the questions just a second here, is if you do decide to crack this open and play with it, is a thing called a volume. Man, my computer's running really slow right now. Let me see if there's anything else I can close. Doesn't normally do this with Zoom, but Zoom does not like my scene. I've never had this before. I've taught this class using this stuff many times. Let me see what else I can. Let me stop my share for a second. And I'm going to try. I'm going to try optimize for video clip. I'll turn off share sound. And I'm going to say share. Can you guys hear me okay and see it okay?
Sure can.
Cool. That works a little better, I think. This isn't a hard scene to create. Like obviously you can use any fog stuff that we give you. These are fog cards we have on the marketplace. And there's only like one I think I built. You can also build this particular material. This is a volumetric material, which we'll talk about later. This is where the only thing that may take a little bit longer to make. And there's so many different ways to tackle this. I made mine pretty simple. You can even make it so yours kind of has waves like these fog cards, but I think the fog cards with it work pretty darn good. There's also a new tool, which we'll talk about in just a bit. I'll cover some of these questions for the lab. But under, I always forget where it's at. It is, oh, that's right. It's under here. Under the magic cube with the plus. If you go to visual effects, you'll see a thing called local fog volume. That's fairly new and it's pretty cool. And I'll show you how you can actually even use that instead of a volumetric fog material placed on a cube. You can actually use this too instead if you want to. It's up to you. The nice thing about the cube one is if you wanted waves of fog, you can actually do that. Got to be careful because if you don't do it right, it'll look like a fog flag just flopping in the wind. All right, so let's see here. What is some of, I think Alex pinged me on that. Going to that area. Lighting for 2D versus 3D tips and tricks. See, that's a tricky one because 2D doesn't have the same lighting, doesn't obey the same lighting rules as 3D for obvious reasons. The best thing I can tell you is you're going to probably have a lot of flat lighting when it comes to 2D. If you look at a lot of the you will pick on platformers. When you look at platformers, a lot of the lighting is flat, so you can see where you're going and what's going on. Now, if you have 2D exploring type of video game platformer, you would have the light local to him, and a lot of that is just you can program that to have like a vignette type of thing. You can even do it through a post process volume, I believe. I haven't really done that myself, but you can have a circle of influence on the object, and you can have it localized to your camera. Actually, you can just do it through the camera, and you can have it so it's like vignetting only on the object of interest. There's going to be required some blueprints or programming to get that to work, because there's going to be times where maybe the whole environment at lights because the character found a switch to turn on the lights, or the torches magically turn on. So that's going to change. So you would want to keep things pretty flat for the most part. The lighting that you use is going to be super simplistic, super simplistic. And you would want to put those lights in front of your card or geometry that's in the environment so they get lit. Now, the nice thing about that.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sean. They're saying that it's hard to read the text.
Again?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
This could be more of the way. Did you hit the checkbox for optimize for video when you started sharing?
I did.
Yeah, maybe uncheck that.
Yeah, let me stop share. I'll share again. Yeah, probably Zoom and Unreal need to like go out for coffee. They don't hang out. They don't like each other. Is it good now?
Not yet.
No.
Do I need to go back into, or was it again?
When you share, well, no, because it's not that. It's almost like it's the whole thing is just low res. Like it looks like we're looking at like a 480p stream or something.
Oh, are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if my internet's not taking a tank today. So let me share. Let me select the object I want to share. I'm going to turn off my optimized video clip again, and we'll do that. How's that now? Better?
Loading. That looks much better. Yes.
Okay,
better.
cool. Then that was probably the culprit mixed with maybe I had an internet dump. What was I saying? Oh, so if you do 2D, move your lights in front of your character. The nice benefit of that, if it's a card type of character that's cut out, you could get a shadow from it, that alpha, and you'll actually have your character lit, like have a shadow on it. But keep your lighting really simple for a 2D platformer. Keep it nice and flat as much as possible, unless it calls to be darker for suspense reasons. And then you can actually maybe run things via your camera connected to your character. You'll have to run a blueprint type of control a vignette type of scenario. I've never done that. I don't really know. I know for a fact it's not hard to do. I just don't know how to do it. And understanding how the camera works and blueprints work gives me that advantage to know that, like, I know it totally can be done. I just haven't tried to implement it with Unreal in its current state. But yeah, for 2D, keep the lighting pretty simple. And for dramatic purposes, just position your lights in such a way that they're condoning to your scene. So make your lights connected to your 2D object. Say you have a torch and your torch is on the wall. I got to give you a scenario. I can't just throw this at you. You put a light in front of that torch that may be behind your character, but you want to make sure you have a nice dumbed down light to light your character consistently in front of the character. So you can attach that light to your 2D character so he's constantly lit. Now, that is a cheap way that you could do without doing the camera vignetting. You can actually make that light connected to a node socket to your character. So wherever your character is going, he is lit, and anything near him will be lit. So that's a quick, cheap way you could do it outside of the camera. But if there's any kind of specific things you want to do so the environment gets lit completely, or the vignetting is controlled a particular way, that's when you can maybe do some blueprints with your camera for your lighting, etc. And again, keep it so that your character is always lit. Keep it nice and flat in some way so the person playing constantly can see him consistent with his lighting. And that can be a pretty muted light, but everything in the background, again, strategically, wherever you want to put those lights, You can put one behind the character, and if for a more lit scene, you can put one in front of the character that are both static so that when he walks into that environment, sorry, I don't have an example, he will look like he's more illuminated because of the torchlight. Now, when you do that, control what lights are having shadows and what not. So in that light itself, you can say, hey, this light doesn't cast a shadow, but this one does. You can tell the light to do that. So hopefully that answers that question. I try to be specific. Again, we're talking about a scenario necessarily doesn't really exist, but I just made some scenarios up. 3-point lighting. Does it work well for objects in motion or more static portrait scenarios? It really just depends what you want to do. 3-point lighting can be applied to anything. And what I mean by that, it just depends on the game scenario. If your character is having a conversation, it works great. If your character is moving, it depends what you want to highlight. Like, I mean, if you want to highlight a door that's in front of the character, it's the mood lighting. It really depends on the scenario. Is it a scary game? Is it not a scary game? Is it a puzzle game? So 3-point lighting is not going to work in every scenario. It depends on what you want to do, because if it's a scary game, you can have a little bit less light, minimal points of interest, very mood lighting. And believe it or not, if you have a scary game, you could end up having like 4 or 5 lights in a scene, but they're just muted and so low that they give you that moodiness to everything. And you're not using 3-point lights, you're using like maybe 10 to get some bounces that you want. You want the character to look at a book on a table. You want to highlight a door that looks very creepy and full of blood. You want to highlight above him so you can see like this moon coming through the broken roof. So every scenario is a bit different, and so your lighting can change. Does that make sense too? Hopefully. Hopefully I'm answering these helpful wise. I'm trying to see in the
Yeah, for sure.
So, where's trying to find the lecture. Look at the threads. There you go. Found the lecture section. What was the other question here? What's the next one? Going back. Too many Slack channels. Go back to. I'll just go to Alex's direct question to me. Thanks for doing that, Alex.
Yeah, trying to make it easy.
It could get lost. No, thank you. How do we get height fog to show up in illuminant reflections? That one, we could do a fog card. That one is still incoming from what I know. I mean, let's do a quick experiment. I'm gonna make because we did have a release last week, so maybe it is better. I haven't got to test it, so I'm gonna make a sphere. Un sphere, yeah. Mr. Sphere, why are you hiding? Don't be afraid. Where'd he go, man? Like, where's his widgets? G key. There you go. That was weird. Widget didn't show up. So let's make this highly reflective. So I'm going to make a special material for him. I'll get into support levels. I'll just stay in here and I'll just make one here. Breaking some of my organization rules. I don't care. M_shiny bits. Shiny bits. And double click. Let's make this super shiny. I'm going to hit 3 key. Try that again. 3 key. A little bit of a refresh issue with my computer today. And I think Zoom is hammering things right now. Now, this can be any color I want it to be. It could be neutral gray. And just for the heck of it, we'll keep it neutral gray. Just any reflective surface. We will. That's not really gray, is it? That's more gray. That's fine. Let's do high specular. So let's set specular to like the 1. I get these numbers flipped sometimes with roughness. Roughness, we'll just promote it to variable. That's fine. And keep that at 0. So we're highly reflective right now. And we can just leave it at that, but we'll push it even further. Let's promote this to parameter. There we go. We'll just do quick control. I do like the numbers set in here, but I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just, I like to have the promoted variable. If you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm just right clicking and promote to parameter. I keep saying variable to parameter, and that makes it so that you have full control. Now, any of these numbers you can punch in and mute things. Notice I set that to 1 on metallic, and that really makes it chrome. So that's key for our reflectivity here on this particular material. Quick material note. All right, so we have super chrome. Super chrome. And I'm going to hit apply. And we're going to drag that on the sphere. Let's actually make the sphere bigger so we can see this. See this conundrum. And slap that on there. So you will notice in our reflectivity, we have no horizon line. Now, if we go into our post-process volume, let's make sure that all our lumen settings are on. So it looks like we're good. It's been a while since I opened this sucker up. Let's turn on our under reflections max rough trace and max refraction bounce. Let's, instead of project default, let's hit this to hit reflections. And let's double check here. Let me actually go all the way down and make sure we're doing infinite extend and bound. There we go. Cool. For our post process. All right. So you'll notice we're not getting this horizon line. And I want to point out something else, because this was a problem with older reflections here. You'll notice our cards, because they have transparency, and we noticed that our reflective surfaces had noise in the last scene. Let's grab one of these cards. Let's do this. We get it from the other side. There he goes. You'll notice if we raise up this card, that's not showing up, right? You'll notice that's not showing up at all, which is a bit frustrating, because what's happening is the emissives almost feel like they're kind of being left out in a way, and anything with translucency. But we noticed it had a calculation issue where things were highly reflective inside of the reflective surface. So these things are evolving. They're not quite there yet. We also notice if we brought in, this is, I do like some aspects of this, but some aspects are kind of frustrating. If we go to Niagara, I'm just going to make a Niagara object here and just grab something from what we got. So let's go to effects. Oh man, my voice is disappearing. Let's go to, this is new. They changed the menu here. Fancy pants. Let's get render target texture painter. Or let's do, let's just do a simple fountain. That's fine. So this Niagara system, I'm going to pull it in, and it's just like a fountain. You'll notice, and this was a bit of a problem with other reflective properties, like older ones. You'll notice it's not showing up. This is a little disheartening for me, because I wanted them to update this. This is kind of a problem when it came to planar reflections. When baking, the effects won't show up. Like my fireflies, if I move this ball down, you won't see my fireflies. But I've had scenes where they would show up. Oh, you do see them ever so lightly. But why can't we see the fountain? This is where it's cool, but not. This is what I meant by, I like the fact that some of my effects will show up, but that fountain's not showing up. Like we don't even see, it doesn't even come to the party. We don't see it. So, and let me lower it to, maybe it just needs a refresh. So those are things to consider when you're making effects and things that glow or shiny or even highly reflective. That, man, my computer's really chugging. I'm sorry. that some things may show up, like my fireflies are working just great, and it might be because they're glowing. You'll see the traces of them glowing. But a regular effect, let's try a fluid. Let me see if I can get my fluids in here. And I think the fluids sometimes show up to the party. These are just things to consider when it comes to reflection in Lumen. There are some disadvantages. It's still not quite there yet. Yeah, let me get plugins. I don't think my fluids is on because I couldn't get it to come up unless you change the menu. Not Niagara fluids. So I'm asking to really hurt my computer here with Zoom. I'm gonna click on fluids. We're gonna say yes. Restart now. Yes, go ahead and save. What do we have? So let's get that going. And then we'll jump into some fog stuff. We talked about that mixer. We did an exercise. And we'll be looking at some fog tools. So I left you some notes, a whole bunch on fog stuff. Pretty cool. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, to answer your question, there's still some issues with that, with reflectivity and so forth. And let's go to support sample files. Support levels, fog 2. Here's my sphere. And let's pull in some liquid. Fluids. I kind of like the way they have this now. It reminds me of Maya, where we used to be able to pull up your sample content. Let's pull up now. Fire and smoke, I think, work okay from what I can remember. But let's give it a shot. Let's get a 3D gas fire. I'm asking for this to get chuggy. Just for the heck of it, I'm going to turn off simulation inside the viewer. Is the fire even going to show up? Come on, man. There you go. So that's not playing in the background. So let's go move this in. That doesn't matter if I don't have it up, so I don't know. Just forced to have it. Let's see if that shows in reflection. Yay! See, so that's what's kind of weird. It's like the fountain didn't show up, but the firewood, because it's got some glowy bits. And so that's a plus and a minus at the same time. So we can get some reflectivity for effects, but some generic effects, something super simple, may not necessarily show up in the reflections. I'm not sure why, because that fountain, those bits are there, those items are there, but until we add more visual fidelity to it, doesn't seem to be represented as good as you necessarily like. Now fire's not too bad. It does get a little noisy as it tries to handle the curve. But we'll notice again, the fog is gone. We don't have the fog. Now, I know that there's maybe Alex knows here. I know that there's a way to at least improve it so it's not so black, but getting it to show up to the party completely, I don't think there's a solution for it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I swear at some point, I stumbled or had figured out a way to do it, but didn't document it well enough. I've been looking for a while to see if I can find anything on it, but no dice. That's about as good as I can get it to right now.
Yeah, me too. If I do stumble upon something, I'll let you know, but this has been black for a while. I could have swore, though, I saw somebody fix this. So it's at least a little better. It's not like perfect, but it's a little better. But I can't remember right offhand, and I apologize. I just my brain doesn't remember. What was the other question? Oh, best practices for non-denoising emissives. No best practices at this time. Don't make them really tiny. Kind of make your emissives a decent size. Like my fireflies, I'm kind of breaking all the rules on here. I mean, I want my fireflies to glow. And my Niagara system, I put in a light, and it works pretty good. It's not too bad, but there are some issues. They will get a little blurry the farther I get away from it. They get blurry and noisy. You'll notice there's some light leaking here too on this particular guy. And I just have a light in here. And that's one of the reasons is my light's inside the geometry, not placed correctly. So just be careful with that. Mine was inside hollow geometry, and Unreal doesn't like that because, I mean, it's solid to an extent. I think the bottom's hollow, actually. Let me check. Sanity check here on the geometry here. Is the bottom hollow? I don't remember. No, it's solid. But it didn't like the way I shoved that light in there because it was trying to render the bottom of the statue. So be careful how you position your lights. And yeah, so emissives, be careful of the small stuff. So if you do have fireflies in your scene, you're really far away and they look like they're spaceships fighting each other. That's just kind of the nature of the glowing right now. So just keep your size decent. So if you wanted to, you could do ridiculously sized fireflies if you wanted to. That could help a little bit. But again, that's still evolving. Opinions and guidance on post-process auto exposure. I do use auto exposure sometimes. I don't use it all the time. And the reason why, and I'll tell you, is because it's doing stuff for you and you want to kind of be in control of things. So I'm going to go to the post-process volume again. I'm going to go to my exposure for a second here. So what I'm doing, I'm using auto exposure histogram here, but I'm locking things down. My exposure compensation is 3.4 because I wanted it a little dark, and I'm clamping my EV minimum 100 to 1 and my maximum EV 100 here also to 1. So if I do load the scene in sequencer, I can adjust those if I needed to. If I do adjust those, you'll see a difference in my scene. You'll see things kind of change and shift, get brighter, darker. You're basically controlling that EV100 on the minimum and maximum level. Now, it doesn't make it very clean. It makes it a little bit harder, but I wanted to clamp these because I wanted to be able to just run it through here, exposure compensation, like it would on a regular just EV slider. And I have it so that if I did want to range, I can create it. Like say my game's a first person game and I want it to look believable. I can say, hey, I want to make a maximum of 8 and a minimum of 1. So what happens is you move your camera around and you look at things. Let's actually set this back to default. You'll see the eye adjust according to what I'm looking at. So if I'm been forced to look against the wall or somewhere else, and I come into a brighter scene and I look up at the sky, you'll see like changes in evaluation. Now, this is super bright because my compensation's high, but you kind of get the idea. Let's set this back to 1. So I usually just clamp this and just treat this like an EV100 slider. And that works good for me. You can also do a basic and a manual. Manual works a bit more like as if you went up here and you ignored your game settings and you just kind of did an EV slider on here. You don't get a minimum maximum option to kind of get grayed out. And that's really up to you how you want your stuff to be portrayed. I, again, like to lock mine down. And then if I want to change it, I can mess with these numbers. I'm going to say a potty word. I can mess with these numbers a bit more and I can make it do what I want to. I'm going to sit down a little bit because lowering my desk. All right. So ideal method for adding color to shadows, probably post-process volume shadows. Section. No, actually, you can change the color of your shadows anywhere. So say the color of this rock shadow. Say I want this rock's shadow to be a bit different. Now, if you do go into the geometry itself and you say, hey, man, is there a shadow section in here? You can tell it to cast shadows or turn off shadows. Now, you don't get color range information on that object. I shouldn't say object, I should say via light. So, but this light, I can control my shadow color. So if I go in here on the light itself, I can say, hey, man, I want the shadow on this. Maybe I'm just, oh man, my caps lock is on. Oh, no, you can't. For some reason, I thought you could on this. I've never really changed shadows colors because I do it, like you said, via post-process. For some reason I thought you could do it here. You can't. Nope. So yeah, your post-process volume would be the best bet if you wanted to change that a bit. You got to give me a scenario though. So what would be the scenario for that? Like, why would you change? I guess for just cartoony feel. So I can open up a project that'll show you shadow color changes via post-process. I need to check something real quick on the scene though. Allow. Do I still have it off? Yeah. So you'll notice in this scene, it still isn't working. Notice my shadows are super harsh because my allow static lighting is off. Now, if I turn that back on, you're going to see the appropriate bounces, and it'll lean on the default AO that's built into these pieces of geometry as they lay on top of each other. So it looks like they have not fixed it with the update. So I have an active jury taken out. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to hit apply, restart, save, and let that save. And it's going to go back to a rather more cleaner bounce. So yeah, I mean, coloring your shadows, I do it a lot of times. Well, at least I'm doing it right now via Toon Shader. So I'm able to control the shadow output of the light hitting the object and even fog control via Toon Shader. And it's actually kind of cool. I literally put lines on my shadows so it looks like it's drawn, hash mark drawn, ink hash lines. Oh gosh, I fail as an artist. That's terrible. I can't talk. So we should get softer shadows now. Not so harsh looking. Yeah, see there, that's a little bit better. So that's the downside of using Quixel Megascans and turning that allow static lighting. So if you read that, ignore that for now. We haven't fixed it just yet. Let me see. Did I cover all the questions? I think I did. All right. So fog. I'm just going to walk you through this. I'm not going to do it necessarily with you. I'm going to walk you through it a bit. So we have a volumetric, just because we don't have a lot of time. We have a volumetric fog in here. Let's actually click on that first, and then we'll pick on the fog cards. So this is basically a cube with a volumetric material on it. A volumetric material, I'll double click on it, is like a regular material. And the fact that it's just the volumetrics are turned on, the options are on to turn it into volumetric. I'm just wanting to make sure I explain that because it doesn't break your brain. You're like, is there another material I have to learn? No, actually, it's just a regular material. We go into the options and we go to material domain and we click and say volume. And then we build this little system in here. Now I left a bunch of nodes in here if you want to experiment. This one's a really generic static fog type of movement. Actually, let me see here. Where did I put my movement? This is a simple grass wind. It makes it look like a flag though, so it doesn't quite look right. So you would have to have several volumetric fog nodes in there, and if you want to layer them or build it so it has more noise, you'd have a noisy texture. In that texture would be some pattern movement. In that pattern movement, you can shift things and depth fade on the edges of your volume. I didn't do that for this one. I kept this one super simple. I did leave an area to be able to make noise and so forth if you wanted to. But you got to be careful with that because if you make too much noise, such as these speed nodes, if you make these speed nodes too high, your fog's going to pop a little bit and be too noisy. So you definitely can play with these features here. So in our fog, it's basically a volume. And let me show you what I mean. It gives you some cheap ground fog as a whole you can place down on here just by building that material. Now, do you have to do that? Not really. Let me show you what I mean. So if I move this down on the ground, we do have some other nodes we've now built. This one's called a volume local fog volume. So if I move away, you'll see it populate. We have to fix the distance on it. You'll see that you can pull these in instead. And you can control the height, the density, the fall off, and so forth. These will only work if inside of your exponential height fog, you've turned on your volumetrics. And that's volumetric fog found here. And that's the only way a lot of these fogs will work, such as the volumetric shader that you saw me use. It'll only work if this is on. The fog cards don't demand it. The fog cards don't require it. And I'll walk you through that in just a second. They're basically just smoke and mirrors. They're just an emissive material with movement of a texture. And you literally could turn off your complete fog off like I just did now, and you'll see they're still working. It's not a dependency. But you'll notice this fog little node that I showed you, this guy. To get to him, if you miss that, is found underneath, actually, oops, you go full screen. It is underneath our little quick add. And we want to go to visual effects and local fog volume. Now, to keep it consistent, we have to control the drawing of this, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's open up our console variables. Let's see if we have one saved. So let's go to our presets, and you'll see I have a fog one. Double click on that. Mine's set by default to 2000. Now, if we want this to Jesus, so slow. Sorry, guys. If we want this to draw, we can set this to maybe 50 if you want to, and then it'll always draw kind of at the same level. There you go. Instead of 2000, we have 50, and you can put a couple of these in here. Control the fading, control the height, control the fall off, and look at that. We've got fog. We've got ground fog without building that material. But you can build that material and add it to a cube. So I left it in there if you wanted to use it and experiment with the material, you can. So again, the environment exponential height fog, once you add it via light mixer or etc., you want to turn on your volumetric fog. The nice thing about working with your fog, you have a control of your fog density, so we can really make the fog density high. And the nice thing about working with your fog fall off and density is the higher you go with some of these, adding more fog, changing things, you can make your scene actually literally brighter if you're not careful. And like in the real world, your water particles are going to bounce around and magnify on the fog. There is secondary data. Let me show you how cool this is. So I'm going to turn on my fog density for secondary data. You'll notice it's kind of influencing our environment right now. And I'm going to turn on my fog height fall off. Or not turn off. Did I say turn off? I'm going to mess with my fog height fall off. Now, what that does, if I have an environment down below, let's turn that back to default. I can actually play with my offset, play with my density, and increase my fall off here or decrease it. And you can see some fog down below. It's a foggier there than it is a bit here. Now, one reason this is a bit more foggy or than maybe normal is my directional light's catching that. So my directional light, we talked about this, inside the light, it has a volumetric intensity control. I can lower this if I wanted to, and maybe pull things via my materials and fog cards, or I can increase it. Notice that also that light changes, it's affecting those nodes we placed on the ground. So if I increase this, notice those nodes get magnified because they're all kind of connected. Ooh, this is kind of looking cool. But using that secondary data for fog, what am I doing? I'm like trying to watch my time and I'm like brain farting out. Fog. Why? Why is my directional light fog? And it chooses all the everything. What is happening with my search here? Exponential height fog. Whatever, dude. Exponential height fog. We'll just select it. I don't know what's happening with my typing. So that secondary data, I can mess with the offset. I can mess with the height fall off. And you can actually get a stronger ground plane. Notice it's not as foggy here, but foggy over here. You can have it so that that's pushing a bit harder. Now, there's a thing called fog instance scatter color. It's black, and that means it's going to pluck that light from it's going to pluck the GI from my environment. If I change this color or make it all white, it's going to make it like a really horrible nuclear San Francisco evening. And it's not plucking any more from my GI, from my overall global illumination, the whole scope of the environment. It's actually taking my color information that I've plugged in. So just keep that in mind. So you could influence things and like, I'm going to make it a little more green, a little more red, whatever you want. Make it like another planet. You can totally do that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can play with here. I'm running a little bit out of time here, but there's also God rays that you could add to a scene. Let me show you what I mean. They're pretty cheap. They're basically screen space based. So as you rotate your camera, they do fade. Not like the actual volumetrics, because our volumetrics right now, you actually see the fog like right here cutting through the geometry. That's true volumetrics. So great. But I can fake a few things to exaggerate, such as my lights coming from this direction. And you can see the fog line coming through. If I wanted to, I could add the God rays. The God rays. Hello, where are the God rays? Let's go down. There you go, light shafts. So I'm going to turn on light shafts, and I'm going to turn on light shaft bloom. And then now with our fog, we have kind of exaggerated. Oh, behold the temple of evil stuff. So deadly and so terrible. Now, if I turn this off, you'll see them kind of fade away. And we'll go back to our true volumetrics. But they can add. The only problem is, let's turn it back on. As soon as I turn my camera in a different direction, they can disappear. Boop. Be gone. So they're kind of cheap. They're kind of cool. A little cheap. Add a little flair to your scene. Fog cards. Oh, I love fog cards. You can do it the cheap way, or you can do the not so cheap way. This guy's a blueprint, and he's really well done. And the fact that he has a fade on here, and what I mean by fade is if you pass through it, it actually looks like you're passing through. That doesn't mean geometry is not going to look really great. So geometry, say this guy's alive. I'm a lamp and I'm walking through fog. It actually does a pretty good job. I thought it would clip it worse, make it worse. It does a pretty good job fading through, and that's built into the material. I'll show you what I mean. It's a little bit of material class combo. So if I go to this blueprint fog card, you go to edit it. And again, you can use any of these. I don't care. Some of these I built, some of these were from the marketplace, like our free stuff that we built. So this particular one, you can see there's a blueprint in here for construction that allows us just to do some editing. But where the heavy lifting is at is in the material itself. So if we click on the object in our viewport here, which houses all of our geometry elements and our material here, I'm going to double click on the material, and you'll see that it's an instance material for quick access and changes. I'm going to go to the parent area. You can see that it has a really nice depth fade. That's why I can pass that geometry through and it does really well. And that's why when my camera goes through, it doesn't really clip. It just does it really well. So this is the little bit more luxurious package of fog cards. This other one I made is a bit more cheaper. And these can be done in the distance where you aren't interacting with them. This guy right here. This fog card, if you pass through it, actually, is that the right one? Let me see. Where's he at? I got to get my cheapos. Is this my cheapo? No, it's not my cheapo. Which one are my cheapies? The cheap seats. Did I remove them? No. No. I may have removed my card. Why would I do that? I've betrayed myself. There you go, fake fog card. There we go. So these one, they're in the front. They're far away from the camera on purpose. So these, the downside of these, and they look really great, is because they don't have that fade option in here in the material. When I pass through, it clips. Notice it just stops. But when I pass through the other ones, it fades away really nice because it's built in. And mine are just kind of like by, on, off. And if we go into the material, you'll see that it doesn't have the fade depth in the same places as the other one. Ours is a little more not dependent on positioning. So let's show that out. All right. My voice is about gone. Any questions on this before we break for lunch? Hopefully you found this helpful and fun. And remember, you can get these fog cards. You can do some really cool stuff. Like I'm going to get the really cheap seat fog card I made. I'm going to Control Z. Alt, drag it. We can duplicate the material and change the speed. Let me rotate it so it's facing us. That's kind of important. 180. And you can put these suckers in the Valley of Doom. So I can grab this fog I made, place it down here. Increase its scale. It's ridiculous. And you can put several of them inside that environment. So like, hey, Alt, no one's a wiser, offset it a bit, Alt, back here, offset it a little bit. There you go. And then from a distance, you're like, ooh, I want to go down there, but there's lots of treasure and death stuff. I think you probably wouldn't say that in real life because it's disturbing. I'm gonna go in this dark alley. I feel like Batman. Yeah, don't do that. But you can see you can actually get some really cool atmospheric kind of thing going on there. Like, wow, there could be
Sean,
magic
there's a quick
swords.
question about culling. Like if you wanted to make it so some fog cards would disappear at a certain distance or something like that. Any idea how to approach that?
Say that again.
It's a question about culling, and if you could make it so fog cards disappear at a certain distance or anything in that kind of vein.
Yeah, you can use a couple things. One, you could literally do it via blueprints, but two, you could do it. The only problem is that the culling box doesn't allow you to isolate. That's why the blueprint might be better. We have a thing called culling volumes. It only does things within a box. So this one may not be the best solution, but there is a mesh merge. Actually, I just want volume, culling volume. Let me go to volumes.
And rereading the question, it also might be more about, can you make it so you're using cheaper fog cards for things far away and higher quality fog options for when things are closer? So it does seem kind of like a blueprint solution. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it. So that's what I would do. I would use the blueprint ones that I have here up front because they fade if you walk into them better. And the one I put down here in the mountain, I would use these. Now, if you ever did want to control culling, I don't really use these very much because I think I don't know, they're kind of goofy, kind of clunky. This is a very old tool we used to have. It's called a culling distance volume. You would build it. I mean, you would create it, and then you would control everything within there to show up based on distance. Like you can punch in all the numbers. I personally don't like this tool very much because I just don't use it and I don't really find a need for it. Unreal handles culling pretty well out of the box, especially with it's basically to control your if you're having some memory issues, like you just have too much on there. That's why you would do culling. And nanite and everything else is just so wonderful. You don't necessarily have to use that. But the problem with that is that doesn't allow you to isolate geometry. I don't think they've updated that. Like I couldn't say only draw the fog at this distance. I don't think I can do that with those culling guys. kind of a very old tool. So I would either do it via Blueprint, where you only have it, you can have it like appear and fade. That might be a little bit tricky to write, or just do what I did, where you have the crappy, the crappy ones in the distance, and the high quality ones in the front. And again, you can use my fog cards. It's $3.99 a piece. Just kidding. I think that's all I got. I'll open it to one other last question here. Otherwise, I should probably let you guys get some lunch. Hopefully you found this helpful. And also one more thing. I'll make it real quick. I didn't get to talk about this too much. So in that post-process volume, I just saw somebody's post and it reminded me. In that, what am I doing, Sean? Go to your search, Sean. In your post-process volume, you have control of your color information. So if you go to your, what's with my voices? I'm really like this in person. You can go to saturation, contrast, gamma, and there's a single slider and there's a color control too. So if I wanted to make this like a black and white environment, I can. Look at that. All because my post-process is infinite, extend, and bound. Long ago, my master taught me how to kung fu-ish stuff in the world. All because I'm in the post-process volume and under the global settings, I'm using saturation. Or you can do it like tonified. Long ago, in the world of super hyper colors, my master told me to kung fu things.
Have the sepia tone.
Yeah, you can do all sorts of cool stuff. Got to mention that. So much stuff to throw at you guys. All right, I'm done. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.
Thank you, Sean. Everyone says
Thanks, Sean.
Hey, thank you guys.